Well, thank you for joining me once again, where people continue to be wrong and recidivist on the interwebs. Don't they, staff? Yes, once again, it's Cyrus Cumsplatter. I do hope I've pronounced that correctly. Today, Cyrus Cumsplatter wants to tell us all about how it is that eating fat causes the diabetes, though. This should be a hoot. I've seen it before. At least I've seen the argument before, and from the same clown before. Let's hear it again, though, and put it right where it's wrong. And spoiler, boys and girls, guess what? That's going to be pretty much everywhere, fundamentally from the ground up. Rightio, come splatter. Off you go.
Let's suppose that you're eating a low carbohydrate diet. So what that means is that you're going to be eating a diet that contains somewhere between, call it 70 to 85% fat in your diet.
Not necessarily. You're probably underdoing it with the protein in that situation for most people.
And then the remainder is going to be fat, protein and carbohydrate.
Okay, yeah.
So a low carbohydrate diet has been sort of talked about, for 30, 40, 50 years at this point. At this point, we're now in the ketogenic diet, and the ketogenic diet is basically considered a very low carbohydrate diet. So what that means is that the total number of carbohydrates that they suggest per day is 30 grams per day, maximum, divided between breakfast and lunch and dinner.
Well, also, we don't necessarily suggest quite so many meals in a day because they're unnecessary.
So you're eating 30 grams of carbohydrate plus more than 150 to 170 grams of fat per day.
Where did you get that from, Cumsplatter? People might not be doing any such thing, in fact.
Day. So again, we're looking at like an 80% fat intake, then a small amount of carbohydrate and the remainder in protein. Okay. So in that situation, when you eat a low carbohydrate diet, you're effectively eating foods that are high in fat, medium in protein. And the fat molecules that are coming inside of your mouth are actually locked.
Lucky Ted's not here.
Bollocks!
Locked up as triglyceride in the food that you're eating. So triglyceride literally means glycerol backbone with 3 fatty acids attached to it. So you're eating, a lot of that triglyceride. It comes down your esophagus. It gets into your small intestine. In your small intestine, the glycerol backbone is removed from those fatty acids. Those fatty acids then go through the wall of your small intestine. They get into your lymph system. Your lymph circulates it into your blood. And then from your blood, they circulate in these particles called chylomicrons. Chylomicrons are particles that can basically deliver these fatty acids to tissue. So you eat it, they get inside of your blood. Now, these chylomicrons are basically trying to give fatty acids to tissue. So if 100% of those fatty acid molecules ended up inside of your fat tissue or your adipose tissue, then diabetes probably wouldn't exist today.
Correct. Perhaps, depending on what else you do in terms of lifestyle activities and what genes you might be carrying, because they do have some impact.
The problem is that those fatty acid molecules, a lot of them do get into your adipose tissue.
Yeah, that's not a problem necessarily, unless you're over adipose, in which case that becomes a problem.
Which is where they belong. It's a perfectly designed storage warehouse to absorb fatty acids from the blood when they're available. But in addition to getting inside of the fat tissue, they also get inside of your muscle. They also get inside of your liver.
Yeah. Now, why is that happening? I wonder, Cumsplatter. It's almost as if there's a role that they can play there, they're useful there, and so they can be deposited there on site for use without much need for transport. Fats, excellent source of energy for muscular work. Wow, incredible that the muscles would allow such a useful substance to accumulate and be stored within a cell, making that cell energetically replete. Fully stored, good for the blag. Awesome. Yep. What's your point?
And that's okay if the total quantity of fat in your diet is maintained at a low level.
No, you don't want to do any such thing, Cumsplatter. That is a mistake. You are absolutely genetically designed by way of the last 4.5 million years or so of positive and negative selection pressures that inform you that as a member of the species Homo sapiens sapiens, your ideal diet must be the one in line with your genetic gift and your history. And as such, that would be why you would have genes selected for and against other sorts of diets. So that would be the sensible thing to do, given that there is no such thing as actual human nutrition science to speak of. It's an area of pseudoscience and crack pottery, largely. That's for another day, though. Anyway, let's make some progress. Come on, Splitter.
Robbie was saying 10%, 15%, maybe as high as 20%.
Yeah, no, that's too low in terms of fat. That's vastly too low.
Okay. But when you're eating a ketogenic diet, again, you're eating 70, 80% fat in your diet.
Not necessarily, still.
And as a result of that, the amount of fat that gets partitioned inside of your muscle and inside of your liver.
Right, now it's petitioned, is it? Okay.
Starts to grow over the course of time.
Right, so there's a storage. That's what the human body does. It stores things up that it might need later, that it doesn't need right now, and it stores it at the sites most conducive to its ease of use and release, i.e. right there on the muscle sites, for one example. Yep.
So today you store a little bit. Tomorrow you store a little bit more. The next day you store a little bit more. And over the course of time, now your muscle and liver have become effectively fatty acid storage depots in addition to your adipose tissue.
Yes.
So your muscle and liver are designed to store small amounts of fatty acids. And inside of each cell, they have this thing called a lipid droplet.
Yes.
The lipid droplet is effectively where the fatty acids or lipid soluble compounds congregate together. So this lipid droplet starts to grow over the course of time within each liver cell, within each muscle cell. And effectively that cell gets into a high energy state where what it's trying to communicate is like, wow, I have too much stuff inside of me.
Right. So I need no input of further sources of so-called energy. I need no further food substrates in the forms of, well, much fat to speak of, actually, because I'm fully replete on that, and definitely not any carbohydrate. And why not definitely any carbohydrate, come Splatter? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because carbohydrate over a certain concentration becomes toxic, very, very toxic to tissues. Whoops. Fat doesn't do that. By the way, that's for another day.
This lipid droplet has grown. Each one of these fatty acid molecules is 9 calories per gram.
Oh, God, absolute nonsense. But carry on, whatever.
And it's a very energy dense molecule.
Yes.
And so the cell effectively says, okay, wait a minute. We need to go into self-defense mode here.
Right. And now, Splatter is going to, he's just explained pretty well, actually, that it's a self-defense mechanism. It's adaptive. This is why the so-called thing they call insulin resistance. This is why it happens at a cellular level, and thus at tissue, and thus at the organism level. Got to be careful with that word, don't you, Splatter? So it's adaptive, useful, worthwhile. It's a normal part of our functioning. It happens for a reason. Tally-ho, good job. But now you want to characterize this as a disease and call it the diabetes.
What, are you retarded?
No. We'll get to that in a minute, I'm sure.
And we need to prevent more stuff from coming inside.
Yes, toxic stuff that would destroy the cell. So it's locked out.
So if it were able to block more fatty acids from coming inside, it would do so. The problem is that fatty acids can easily get inside of tissues.
So are you saying there, Splatter, that there's no evolutionary line of any kind of anything that could be produced by the human body that could close that door to fat entering the cell? Were that problematic in some way to the cell? You can bet your sweet little hairless bottom, young man, that it would have. It's not there for a reason, Splatter, and it's not there because it's not required, because fat is not toxic at high levels, whereas sugar absolutely is. That's why the door is locked to sugar in such a situation when a cell is energetically replete. Okay, this is really simple to understand, even if your theology absolutely dictates to you, cum splatter, that it must not make sense to you and you must ignore it, no matter how many times you hear it explained. It's really incredible, isn't it, staff? Right, off you go, cum splatter.
You can easily get inside of your fat. I'm sorry, your liver and your muscle, because the mechanisms to get fat inside of there are not very highly regulated.
Because it's not a problem for it to be there. Good. Okay.
So because these tissues can't really block too much more fat from coming inside, what they can do is they can block the ability to communicate with insulin.
I'll tell you what, another example of somebody blocking coming inside in some sort of way might have been a good idea a few years ago. Maybe. That's for another day too, isn't it, cum splatter?
Because the insulin is a molecule that's mainly designed to allow glucose to enter tissues.
Mainly, yes, but it has many, many roles.
In addition to that, glucose can also signal fatty acids and amino acids to come into tissues, albeit just a little bit less powerfully
insulin
than glucose.
can.
Yes.
Right.
So the cells do is they basically say, all right, listen, what if we were to just shut down this insulin signaling pathway? Because if we did that, then when insulin comes knocking at the door, we can basically block pretty much all of glucose from coming in, and we can also block a small amount of fatty acids and a small amount of amino acids from coming inside.
Right. Love it. So we're talking about an adaptive process here to protect the cell from damage it would experience were the sugar allowed to pour in according to its concentration gradient under the assistance of a large bolus of insulin. Cell says, no, thank you. I'm full. Don't need it. Locks the door, prevents the damage. It's great, isn't it? I'm still not seeing a disease.
So intracellularly, this lipid droplet starts to create a traffic jam.
No. Inept analogy. There is no need for transit for substances exterior to the cell, to the interior compartment of the cell, because, remember, the cell is replete, has a droplet of fat sat there ready to go. It does not need any input from the outside. Thank you. Okay, still perfectly adaptive and indicated. Where are we going with this? I know where we're going because I've heard this argument a billion times. Come on, cum splatter.
And this traffic jam, basically goes into the inside surface of these insulin receptor.
Not a traffic jam. He's talking about a bunch of knock-on effects, one intermediary on the next intermediary, leading to the inside surface of the GLUT4 transporter, where it is that transporter is basically allosterically altered in such a way as to no longer be able to allow the transit of glucose into the cell. Locks the door from the inside, if you like to think of it that way. Okay? Good idea. Not a disease.
And starts to alter some of the proteins that start the insulin signaling cascade.
On the surface of that cell.
On the inside of that cell.
Okay.
Yeah. So the insulin receptor is sort of like out into the surface, in the extracellular environment, interacting with insulin. But then when you cross the cellular membrane on the inside, there's a whole bunch of, there's another motif in that protein. And if you alter the way that protein functions, or alter any of its downstream signaling molecules, then you can basically shut down or strongly inhibit the action of everything underneath it.
Right, so you mess with the ability of the GLUT4 transporter and the insulin receptor specifically to do their job. You prevent that pathway from occurring. Sugar can no longer enter the cell, irrespective of its concentration or driving force outside the cell according to its concentration or that of insulin. Self-protective mechanism still.
So it's basically just a game of dominoes. Let's just alter the first couple so that nothing else beneath it functions properly. So this lipid droplet ends up causing a problem. And
no, there is no problem. The cell is replete with energy, and it will use that energy happily as long as it remains replete with it. Once that lipid droplet has been used up to some degree, its effect on allowing import into the cell from the external compartment outside the cell will be alleviated, relaxed, and stuff will again be able to flow into the cell according to its needs. Okay? Still not a disease.
And impairing insulin signaling.
Hang on. The reason the signaling of insulin has been, as you falsely label it, impaired, is exactly what we've just been talking about for the last few minutes. It's to protect the cell. It is not an impairment. It is a fine-tuning of function according to the evil machinations of the genes working in concert to do exactly what they're supposed to and react to the circumstances in which you've placed those genes at that time.
So as a result of that, the next time that you go and eat a banana.
Well, there's your problem, isn't it? There's the cause of your so-called diabetes. Because diabetes, cum splatter, is elevated blood glucose. Nothing else. That's how it's diagnosed. That's what it is. That's what the pathological process is, elevated blood glucose. The cause of that is pouring glucose, forming substances such as bananas down your stupid neck. Exogenous carbohydrates are unnecessary. We are perfectly capable of producing the exact amount we require, and we do, happily, without any intake whatsoever. There are no required carbohydrates in the human diet. Your perfectly adaptive metabolic adjustments that it's made under the influence of the fact you've been consuming, quite correctly, a large amount of fat, but not as high as you suspect or talk about there, cum splatter, and relatively low carbohydrates, means that your body is expecting you to continue to feed it that way, and it's optimized for that. You throw a bunch of sugar at it, that will perturb it in the short term, and that will be a problem. There is absolutely no place in the human diet for carbohydrate cum splatter. And to say that fruit and other carbohydrate producing so-called foods are not the problem, are not the cause of carbohydrate, is not the cause of diabetes, is absolutely ludicrous. Because diabetes is elevated blood glucose, and the thing that elevates the blood glucose, cum splatter, is pouring things down your stupid neck that quickly release glucose and other sugars. Okay? Pretty straightforward, really. What is next, cum splatter?
Or you have a bowl of quinoa or some wild rice as an example.
Why would you do any of those things? None of those things are appropriate food for a human being. There would be an occasional treat thing that I might do once or twice a year, for goodness sake, and then regret doing, because my body reacts very badly to those kind of things these days, because it knows, and it's well-tuned machine for running on animal flesh and animal fat.
That's carbohydrate rich.
By the way, I'd loathe to say it, but I will anyway. If I was to ask you one simple question regarding cum splatter here, would you be honest in the way you'd answer the question? Here's the question. If you unknowingly didn't know who cum splatter was, you just somehow ended up with an appointment to do a consult with this guy, and you walk into his office, and you sit down opposite him at the desk, and you take one look at the boy, do you not just then stand up again immediately and say, no, thanks, and, send me the bill, sorry for wasting your time at that point? I would. The question is, would you take health advice from this individual? If you would, I guess that's your funeral, quite literally, probably. Because this is a bloke who's part of a dynamic duo of individuals who run a thing called Mastering Diabetes, where what they claim to be doing is mastering diabetes. What they're actually doing is adjusting people's diets in the wrong way to get a very mild reduction in their blood glucose control and calling that a win. While at the same time trying to dish up the kind of disinformation that cum splatter is doing in this little film here, to bolster basically their vegan ideology, their ridiculous vegan ideology. All right, let's hear it.
Food. Those carbohydrates enter your digestive system. Those carbohydrate chains get broken down into glucose. Glucose is now in circulation inside of your blood.
Right, and that's the thing that caused the elevation in the blood glucose in the case of someone who is so-called diabetic, because that's what it is and that's how it's diagnosed. I think we've nailed it, cum splatter, haven't we? Right, so do fruits contribute to diabetes when that is apparent in a person? Yes, they do. Okay?
Glucose has to be accompanied by insulin in order to get inside of tissues.
Has to is too strong. There is another route in that it can actually get in without that assistance. You're supposed to have a PhD in biochemistry, cum splatter. Another question for you, cum splatter, while we're here, is that if your dietary approach is as ideal as you make it out to be, why would a person who chooses such a diet, such as yourself, end up expressing not less than I'm aware of? I think you have at least 3 distinct, quite serious autoimmune dysfunctions. Now, okay, that might just be bad luck. You might just say it's in the genes, but you and I both know that genes are not a fait accompli. They can be switched on or off. So it sounds like you've been doing something in your life that might have switched some of your genes the wrong way, son. Maybe? I don't know. Let's carry on.
So insulin comes knocking at the door, says, hey, knock, knock. I got this glucose. You want to take it up? And the cells respond by saying, we can't take it up right now. Sorry.
They're not sorry. They're going, nah, actually, we're full. We need nothing else. No apologies are required. It's just a physiological fact.
We got all this lipid that we got to take care of first. Or some of the cells can't even hear insulin because they've shut down the entire signaling pathway. So as a result of that, insulin's knocking, it's knocking, it's knocking.
Yeah, you've said, we get it. It's not really doing that, but okay. Insulin is attempting to do what insulin does, and physiologically, the cells concerned have disabled its ability to do so. They've locked the door from the inside. We get it. There's a good reason why it's occurring. It should be occurring. It's adaptive. It's self-protective. It's not a disease. What's next?
It's knocking, saying there's no response. Knocking, no response. So as a result of that, the glucose gets trapped inside of your blood.
Right.
Not really so much. It starts to pull there, but it does have exit routes from the blood. The most important is into de novo lipogenesis, triacylglyceride, which then circulates back and is stored in the adipose tissue if it's not immediately oxidized, for the most part. Or the other way out is that actually in extreme situations of very, very high blood glucose, it can pass out through your kidneys in the urine. Okay? What's next?
So you have literally one banana, and then you go check your blood glucose 2 hours later, and you look
Literally one banana.
at the number, and you're like, 245? I only have...
So that what that tells you, cum splatter, is that bananas are not appropriate food for a human being. There it is. Okay? But somehow your theologically held devotion to your ridiculous ideology doesn't allow you to see the basic common sense and logic of that. That's what we do here in the Meat Militia. We overcome very, very bad ideas with much, much better ones, don't we? Oh, there's cum splatter's little plaything, business partner. Sorry, I don't know how I pronounced that so badly. Must be tired because of all that meat and stuff I've been eating. Yeah, this is Grandma Robbie. Put him in a pink gingham dress with a blue rinse wig, some hair rollers, put a house coat on him. You'll see what I mean. Okay, right. I wonder if Grandma Robbie has anything to say. And again, if you sat down across the desk from Robbie, are you going to stand up again and say, "There's just nothing you've got for me, pal. Sorry for wasting your time. Send me the bill. See you later." I would.
had one banana. I guess bananas are bad for me. See?
Oh, he does get it. Fantastic. I think he's being sarcastic though, don't you, boys and girls?
Every time I try and eat fruit, my blood glucose goes high.
Well, what does it tell you about eating fruit, doofus?
Every time I eat potatoes, my blood glucose goes high.
Same question.
I guess those foods are bad for me. I
Yes. Good. You're getting it.
should eat less carbohydrate-rich food.
Correct. Thank you, Cyrus Cumsplatter. Finally, he's got there. Only I think he's being sarcastic still. La, 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 la.
So when that glucose is trapped in your bloodstream,
Still not trapped. It's pooling there to a certain level.
with the insulin, and the cells are sort of refusing to uptake it.
They're not sort of refusing. They're absolutely refusing.
Is that then,
Those that are fully activated in that regard. It's a sliding scale, actually. Anyway, that's for another day.
and prompt additional insulin secretion? So the insulin then continues to build in the bloodstream? Like,
Right. Yeah.
What is the downstream impact of that, and how does that relate to insulin resistance?
Yeah, someone knows his biochemistry. I like this.
Yeah, but it's not you, Cum Splatter, or Grandma Robbie. Sorry about that.
I like this.
This
is good.
Trust me, I'm winging it here.
No, this is great. So yes, in that situation, what we just described, that is classic insulin resistance.
No, that's a construct. Insulin resistance is a construct. And it's reversible quickly by doing the right things if reversing it is what you want to do for some reason. The reason that it's in effect, as I say, is adaptive and is indicated. The body really knows what it's doing in terms of protecting itself in that way. The error is in thinking that either you should or must or even can get away with consuming significant carbohydrates without there being a price to pay, because you are not biologically designed to do so. It's pretty straightforward.
Right. So like we talked about earlier, insulin resistance can progress into prediabetes and then eventually to type 2.
No. Diabetes is either in effect or it's not. It's a threshold decision based on a level of glucose in the blood and nothing else. Cum splatter. Your insulin resistance as a etiology and underpinning cause of diabetes is also a construct. Please name the company from which you have recently purchased a meter which will measure insulin resistance on a patient. They don't exist because it's a construct. It's not a physiological parameter, cum splatter. It's a silly idea put together by people who are self-interested in making sure that people have disinformation rather than actual knowledge in their heads. Okay? What's next?
So in that state, if you've developed this level of insulin resistance, a small amount of insulin resistance, then the beta cells inside of your pancreas are saying, you know what? The insulin that we just manufactured and secreted into the blood, it didn't really do much. Let's make more.
Mm-hmm.
So then they go into sort of overproduction mode. And instead of making, call it 5 units for a given meal, they're going to make 7 units.
And guess what? Had you not poured the carbohydrates down your ill-informed, ridiculous neck, this would not be an issue and your body would not be reacting that way because it would not have released a huge bolus of insulin in the first instance. Whole thing could have been averted by avoiding the thing that is not food. Carbohydrates and fiber-laden nonsense. Plants. Cum splatter. Really, seriously, if you want to take health advice from Cyrus Cum Splatter, be my guest. A number of people do it, so-called mastering diabetes, so-called, for some reason. I really can't understand why, especially considering Cum Splatter's really quite public statements in the past about his desire to cure diabetes. Should we see it again? Here it is.
Right? Now, if there was a magic pill that I could take today that would eliminate type 1 diabetes, I swear to you, I would not take it. I would not take it because I don't want to get rid of type 1 diabetes.
Right. Thanks for that, Cum Splatter. Very, very credible individual, this young man, isn't he? Very credible. Carry on, Mr. Credible.
And that happens today. And maybe those extra 2 units, they go and they get the job done and it brings your blood glucose down.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could stop eating carbs and that would bring your blood glucose down, wouldn't it?
And tomorrow, the same thing happens. And then the next day, the same thing happens. And then months and years down the road, before you know it, normally your pancreas was secreting, call it 25 to 30 units of insulin per day. And now that 25 to 30 has grown to 40, 50, 60. Sometimes it can be
all fueled by inappropriate intake of carbohydrates for those years that you're talking about there, Cum Splatter. All of it unnecessary. All of it working against your physiology, doing what it's absolutely genetically encoded to do, given the circumstances in which human beings have existed for the vast majority of at least the last 350,000 years, probably more like 4.5 million, relatively stable across that time scale as well.
be 4 to 5 times as much as you were secreting in the non-diabetic state.
Yes.
So this domino effect, this cascading series of events can all be tracked back to excess lipid intake, which then, causes...
Only if you're an imbecile of some kind, frankly. Because the begging the question fallacy here is that it's normal and natural for a human being to be able to tolerate, let alone require, any amount of carbohydrate to speak of, taken in exogenously in their diet. And that it's abnormal for the body to basically reject that intake as unnecessary at the time. It's absolutely, fundamentally, utterly ridiculous. The cause of the so-called insulin resistance and the so-called diabetes is the same thing, and it is elevated blood glucose, period. You do not elevate your glucose by eating meat and fat, do you? No. I think we're done. But these boys are still got about half of their video left. What could possibly be left that they could get wrong? Shall we see?
Is your liver and muscle cells to overaccumulate these lipids and shut this whole thing down.
Oh, hang on. Overaccumulate? That's interesting. If it were an overplus and it were deleterious, don't you think the body would react in such a way as to maintain its homeostasis within reasonable set points? People whose health is off outside of normal, rational set points is because their physiology has been pushed beyond its individual capacity to respond to the misabuse. Misabuse? The abuse, the disuse in some cases. All the disses and misses and all of that. And those people can generally get it back if they stop listening to imbeciles who want to blame a problem with sugar on anything other than consuming unnecessary sugar, which means all forms of carbohydrate, because that's what they all break down to. There is absolutely no logical pathway out of this situation that makes any sense or that can be justified scientifically in any way, shape, or form. This is the most ludicrous disinformation I've seen in a long time. Fat is the cause of my sugar dysfunction. Oh, well, bugger me.
Exactly right.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can think of it as like excess accumulation of saturated fatty acids in tissues that are not designed to store large amounts of fatty acids.
But they are come splatter, and that's why they do so, you buffoon. Oh, my word, is it possible genuinely to be as simultaneously over-opinionated and under-educated as you patently are, son? Is this really possible in the real world?
Acids that then causes a traffic jam.
No, still, that's your construct, that's your model, and it's false. There is no traffic jam because there is no need of transit.
Of glucose inside of your blood.
There is no need of traffic flow.
Right.
No, wrong, for the reasons I've just said.
And in turn, eating a low carb or a ketogenic diet that's high in fat is basically a masking technique. Because
no, it's a technique of feeding your body appropriately for your genetic gift, your anthropological past, your speciation as a human being, demonstrably and clearly, as it seems, to anyone with more than 3 brain cells to rub together. Turns out, boys, that to have a significant number of brain cells, first of all, you have to have a cranial capacity for those instead of such cranium being laterally squeezed in sideways. And also you need quite a bit of fat and cholesterol and other such goody goods to build such brain cells.
Because you're not taking in any carbohydrates, you're not prompting your pancreas to secrete any insulin. So you're under the illusion that you're dealing in the solution, but actually
the solution is not eating carbohydrates still, yes. Absolutely is the solution to elevated blood glucose in everyone who eats any carbohydrates at all. Those who don't eat any carbohydrates at all and still seem to have or think they have a blood glucose issue should contact me for consultation. There are answers, there are tools, we can get that sorted if it needs to be. In the rare cases of carnivores who still think they have an issue after a bit. Okay, carry on.
You're just basically exacerbating a situation that will manifest the minute you put any carbohydrates into your body whatsoever.
Exactly, and that's why you should not do so. There is no need to do so. It is not a requirement for life. There are no dietary required carbohydrates of any kind. So why would you do it?
So you're actually exacerbating insulin resistance by doing that. You're just
Only if your conception of what insulin resistance is, i.e. a pathology of some kind, were correct. So you're begging the question, and it's a fallacy because your model of what insulin resistance is and that it's a pathology is false. It's wrong. You are talking about an adaptive physiological process that exists for a reason, and it's doing what it should do. Still,
not seeing the impact of that until or unless you eat some carbohydrates.
which you still shouldn't do.
That's
Is that accurate?
right. So
Yeah.
you live in an insulin resistant state by eating a ketogenic diet,
And you're making it worse.
and you're making it worse over the course of time,
No, it's not worse. It's adaptive still.
and you're playing the carbohydrate avoidance game.
It's not a game to avoid taking in things that are not food for human beings, not appropriate for human beings, largely toxic to human beings at various different levels for various different reasons, and all around a pretty stupid idea.
Which allows you to never challenge your liver or muscle with the
Never is a long time. Even, I think, the most devout, most of the most devout so-called carnivores, 100% carnivores, will take in an amount of carbohydrate from time to time as a rare thing. A small amount, mind. It is an option. It is part of signaling of various things to the human body that is still part of our genetic programming. And it does and can have a purpose as a very, very rare occurrence in very, very small amounts for various things. But that's all.
to uptake glucose, large amounts of it.
Yeah,
And
but you know, uptaking large amounts of glucose is a bad thing. You're not designed to do that, cum splatter. You're not supposed to do that. That's why your body stops it from occurring at a certain level to protect itself.
As a result of that, you literally cannot see that you are living with insulin resistance.
And neither do you give a rip-roaring fuck. Because it's not an issue for you. It's only an issue if that person desires for some reason to take in any significant amount of carbohydrates at once, which they should not do. That doesn't mean they're in a diseased state. It means they are running optimally according to the way they are feeding their body. And ergo, they should continue to feed their body, which is now attuned optimally for that feeding pattern, and allow it to do that without the interference of toxic, exogenous carbohydrates. Cum splatter.
And to be fair, I don't want us to get ridiculed on Twitter.
Well, it's not going to be on Twitter, Robbie, Grandma. It's going to be right here on good old YouTubies. That's where it's going to be. And you are going to get ridiculed as long as you continue to espouse this fallacious, ridiculous, anti-scientific nonsense that you're espousing over there on so-called mastering diabetes. It's criminal, Robbie. It's misanthropic and criminal what you're doing. Stop it. You've been told.
So
Well, that'll happen no matter what.
if you do a low carbohydrate diet and you lose
You get
weight,
results.
You get results,
Yeah.
but you also can see some studies showing improvements in insulin sensitivity if they lose weight.
Yes. Again, working from the false construct of what insulin resistance is, and the assumption that it is a pathology of some kind. Still.
So there is a small improvement, but it's
No, it's not an improvement. Improvement is a false label based on the logical error in fact that I've just outlined. Still.
not the same magnitude of improvement that we're talking about here.
What sort of improvement are you talking about, Robbie? Helping people get their blood glucose under control by getting their A1Cs to 6.5? No, son. That's not helping people get their A1C under control. It might be better than it was at 14, but nonetheless, you're doing harm rather than good, actually, on balance. And, you know, it really would be better if you'd stop doing that.
Once you lose the weight and your weight stabilizes and you perpetuate like a low carb diet, you'll be able to kind of maintain that state, right? And your blood work will be stable.
Your blood work will still be irrelevant.
You're going to hit a plateau.
Yes and no. Yeah. So,
Yeah, pull your head in, Robbie. Cum Splatter's going to answer this one.
I mean, it is possible, sure. So let's say you lost 40 pounds on a ketogenic diet because weight loss is an inevitable consequence and it's one of the main things that happens. And it's one of the main reasons why people adopt a ketogenic diet. So they lose weight, and as a result of losing weight, total cholesterol drops.
Which is not a good thing.
HDL cholesterol sometimes goes up. Triglycerides drop.
None of those things are necessarily positive or negative. They're just signals that your body is reacting to the situation in which you've placed those genes at that time. And it's doing it optimally to maintain your homeostatic set points. Let's leave it to it, shall we?
A1C goes down, fasting insulin goes down, fasting glucose goes down, blood pressure goes down. So all these markers
would seem to be positive changes. Goodness me. We better not do that ketogenic thing. It sounds really dangerous to me.
these biomarkers start to move in the right direction. And you're like, I've done this only for a year. This is fantastic. Now I'm at my normal weight. That's great. Those are short-term results and those are phenomenal. And I'm not going to take that away from anybody who's experienced that. That's great. But what a lot of people who come to us relay to us is that they say, hey, look, I've been doing this ketogenic thing. I've been doing this low carbohydrate thing for a while, but I can tell that I'm just not functioning. I'm not firing on all cylinders.
That's
right?
because the optimal human diet is hypercarnivore, not ketogenic. Okay, simple. So they adjust their diet to 100% carnivore and they'd probably be firing on all cylinders within a reasonable period of time, depending on where they're coming from, their history and all of that. Good. We've put the world to rights today, but there's still more cum splatter to be cleared away. So let's get on with the cum splattering.
Right. And what that means is that they've either developed or are in the process of developing other chronic conditions like...
Well, how do you know? Where do these generalizations come from, cum splatter?
Hypertension. And once they've plateaued, now things can move in the wrong direction. Sometimes they get high LDL cholesterol.
Which is not a pathology nor a concern of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sometimes they become hypertensive.
That is a pathology and needs dealing with. But that's not necessarily to do with their diet at all.
Sometimes they end up developing really complex digestive problems.
Sometimes they do, yes. Usually that occurs when people change their diet overnight instead of doing it slowly, i.e. glacially over a number of weeks, as I always recommend. If you're going to change your diet from anything to anything else, don't do that overnight. There you go, I've said it again. Still true, shouldn't do that.
They get gas, bloating, constipation, and that's frequent, and it
Yeah, well, they get the shits.
prevents them from being able to
Or worse.
eat frequently. A lot of people say, oh, you know, I have this brain fog. Like I just cannot think clearly and I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, it's tied to the same thing. It's a microbiota dysbiosis issue largely.
A lot of people can't exercise frequently.
Same deal.
And so there's all these sort of like ancillary conditions that begin to accumulate over the course of time.
Not so much accumulating over the course of time. If you do a proper transition to a proper diet in the proper way, you're not going to be accumulating issues or problems. And most issues related to changing, at least to the carnivore diet, are around doing that too suddenly. Okay, what's next?
Some of them are diagnosable conditions. Some of them are non-diagnosable conditions. And it generally makes people over the course of a year to 2 years to 3 years, depending on the individual. A lot of them are like, I don't know if I can continue or want to continue to do this anymore.
It's very difficult
Maybe they should try carnivore because that's the ideal diet for a human being.
to maintain. And the one thing that's happening that
It's not difficult to maintain at all, Robbie.
you cannot argue or disagree on is that they have eaten themselves into a state of glucose intolerance.
And rightly so. Because we are not designed to be tolerant to glucose. That's not how it's supposed to be. That's not normal. That's not ideal. And your fundamental, total lack of understanding of the physiology and biochemistry involved here is quite stunning, Robbie. Quite stunning.
They'll say, "Oh, well, I don't care. Like, I'm not going to eat a banana. Why would I eat a banana anyway?"
I'm just never going to eat a carbohydrate ever again.
So they can say that if they want to. That's fine. But the fact is, they've eaten themselves into a state of glucose intolerance.
It's still the same response. Repeating it won't actually make it any different, Robbie. It's still the same response you're going to get.
And the only way to get out of it is to lower their fat intake and eat more carbohydrate-rich food.
No. Another begging the question fallacy there, Robbie. Why in purple fuck would they want to get out of that? My body is now attuned for eating an appropriate diet for my speciation. I'm getting everything I need. I'm not poisoning myself with toxic exogenous carbohydrate and plant-based toxins otherwise, irritants and all sorts of carry on like that. My health is going great. Everything's fantastic. My weight is stabilized to my genetically predetermined ideal level. My exercise tolerance and performance has returned to baseline after a short dip around the adaptation process of around a 6-month decrement in performance. Now performance is better than it was before, if anything. And we can go on all day about the benefits of eating a diet appropriate for your speciation. And that's not a diet based on plants, Robbie, because that's not what we are designed to do by natural selection pressures. No amount of arguing otherwise will make it so. The data is in here. All we need here is the stable isotope testing that tells us absolutely what human beings have eaten throughout their history. Ergo, those are the genes selected for. That's how our organ systems have developed to the way they are now to be best conducive to deal with that lifestyle and not one where we pour toxic carbohydrates, plant materials, and fibers down our necks. Okay? Sorry about that.
Which they will do, and they say, "Oh, yeah, if I want to become more insulin sensitive and perform well on oral glucose tolerance."
Wow, by the way. Wow. Absolutely, Robbie. Tell us all about health, son. By the way, another individual with at least one life-threatening autoimmune dysfunction. Wonder what that's about.
Tolerance test. I just have to carb adapt. Okay, yes, you have to start adopting features of the mastering diabetes method to become more insulin sensitive.
In fairness to that
But why would we want to follow your method, Robbie? Your method gets mild decreases in a person's A1C and doesn't get them anywhere near where they really need to be. It is not a successful program. It's criminal what you're doing. As I've said, you are misguiding people. At some point, it's got to stop. And at some point, it will. But I guess we'll just count the days until that happens.
That individual, that's got to be a scary prospect. Like if they've been told their whole life or ever since they've been diagnosed that they got to eat low carb and they've been doing it and they've gotten to a place of stability with that, for you to then say, actually, you got to switch gears and do the exact opposite. I would imagine that provokes a little bit of fear in most people.
For sure. There's no question.
Yeah.
That would if somebody said that to me, that would provoke me standing up, saying thank you very much, but there's nothing further I need to discuss with you or hear from you in future. Thank you. See you later. We're done.
No doubt. I mean, I think you're bringing up a really important topic here, which is that
the psychology of this is just as important as the biochemistry of it.
Yeah, I would say the psychology is even more important than the biochemistry. Like, we can nerd out on biochemistry all day long.
Yeah, but you get it wrong, cum splatter. Badly destitute in your interpretations of absolutely everything. Completely ridiculous.
But at the end of the day, there's a certain amount of like emotional anxiety that it creates in people when all of a sudden you say to them, a couple of things like, number one, you can eat potatoes, as an example. You can eat fruits. And I think what people do is...
You can, but that doesn't mean you should. Quite different things.
They translate that message into, oh, so you're saying what I've been doing is wrong, right?
Well, if a person has been consuming a diet which is not ideal for their speciation, then they have, by definition, been doing it wrong. Haven't they, cum splatter?
And then it can create a sort of like negative mindset.
Right.
Right.
A defensiveness.
Exactly. And in reality, we never want to point a finger at someone and be like, yo, you're doing
but you don't even want to cure diabetes, cum splatter, remember? Good. What's next?
Something wrong. Again, even in this conversation of low carbohydrate diets, we want to be very clear. We're not pointing a finger at any individual. We're just sort of saying the science could use some refinement.
Well, yes, the science could do with some refinement. Everything that you've espoused in this video, cum splatter, is absolutely 180 degrees out of phase with what science will tell you, in fact, though. And you don't seem to be aware of that because your theology absolutely requires you not to be aware of it, to ignore that, to sweep it under the carpet. You should share a cell with Grandma Robbie. You are both perpetrators of a criminal act of disinformation against an unsuspecting public who deserve better. Join me next time when Ted may have gotten over his annoyance with me. For those who have missed it, the news is that Ted did have some quite strong views when he was advised that he was not going to accompany me recently to Hawaii for the week.
Was Ted here?
F you sideways, you boring whore, f off, you.
Thanks for joining me. Join me next time. See you then.